but it's the guy you've all been waiting for. I'm joined now by best-selling author, critically acclaimed filmmaker, Dinesh D'Souza joins us right now. Mr. D'Souza, thank you so much for joining us on Liquid Lunch.
My pleasure. Good to be on the show.
So one of the questions that I keep asking, and I've been researching it, and Frankie's like one of the best news guys around, is if we have our intelligence, we've named them a domestic terror organization. Why don't we know who the head of the organization is?
Well, I think Antifa has operated largely without the scrutiny of not only the authorities, but also the media. The mainstream media is kind of in cahoots with Antifa. And so are powerful figures in Hollywood, clearly in the offices of the mayors of Berkeley, Portland, and New York City, not to mention other governors and so on. So this is not a ragtag paramilitary operation. It is the paramilitary operation of the Democratic left. They know about it, they know what it does, and they find what it does to be kind of useful. That's why they protect it, they defend it, they apologize for it. Oh, these Antifa guys are in pain. You know, that's why they do what they do. They're not in pain. These are pyromaniacs, they're terrorists, they're arsonists, they're looters. They're doing this as part of a political strategy. And the left knows it, but they are putting on this big charade to see if they can sucker the American people into believing that these are just, youthful idealists who are suffering.
But who's really behind them? I mean, I know you dug into this deep in your book, The United States of Socialism. Who's behind it, why it's evil, and how to stop it? Who's really behind them? Where's the money come from?
Well, it's not just the money, but it's also the type of people who are attracted to it. So yes, George Soros, for example, funded a group called Refuse Fascism. Now, Refuse Fascism was started by a bunch of people, but one of them was Bill Ayers. Bill Ayers of the Weather Underground fame, the same guy who tried to bomb the Pentagon, along with a group of his buddies. And so there are roots here of Antifa in the 60s left, just as, by the way, the 60s left had its roots in the so-called red diaper babies of the 1930s. In other words, you had communist parents giving rise to children who became activists in the 60s, and their kids are now members of Antifa. So a lot of this runs in families. And like I say, it's supported in academia. You can almost say that some of progressive academia is the theory and Antifa is the practice. It's supported in the media. CNN has basically become now a public relations arm of Antifa. And it's supported by the dough of people like Soros.
You spend a lot of time in your book, Mr. D'Souza, talking about identity socialism, where you point out that historically in this country anyway, people that have been on the left, they haven't been all about identity socialism, whereas now, if you want to be embraced by the left, you sort of have to make that your central focus. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how today's liberals or left-wingers or progressive or whatever description you want to use, like Elizabeth Warren or Stacey Abrams, how they compare to historical heroes of liberalism like FDR, like Henry Wallace, like John F. Kennedy.
Well, FDR's political base was the white working class. Those were the people who put him in office, and those were the people who kept him in office. Today's Democratic Party is completely different. You ask the Democrats on the stage today, who wants to give free healthcare to illegal aliens? And every single hand goes up. That's very telling because it shows that this identity socialism, as I call it, is in the mainstream of the Democratic Party. It's not just Bernie, it's not just Rashida Tlaib or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It is Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and the whole gang, Schiff, all the others. So what's going on here is that socialism has moved from a working class phenomenon to now a phenomenon that is about identity politics. And the Democrats are trying to divide society, not just as Marx did between the rich and the poor. They do play the class card, but also based upon black against white, straight against gay, legal against illegal, male against female. So if you look at things from the Kavanaugh hearings to the race riots that are going on now, these are ways of fomenting identity grievances sometimes taking advantage of a real injustice, as in the case of George Floyd, but then using that injustice as a vehicle to create a much larger conflagration and target new people. I mean, look at the people they're beating up: store owners, right? People who have absolutely nothing to do with George Floyd.
Right. And Mr. D'Souza, our last minute, we're going to have another segment after this, but I know many people who aren't political wonks may not realize, but Bill Ayers and his girlfriend Leslie Dorn, they were, got, indicted and jailed for bombings where people were killed. And do you see any connection between Robert Johnson, the founder of BET, and Ayers? And I know Obama had his first fundraiser in Bill Ayers' living room, so I see a connection there. Did Robert Johnson connect to this crew anyway?
That I don't know. I do know Ayers somewhat. I've debated him a couple of times. I've actually met his wife, Bernadine Dorn. Now, interestingly, Ayers, although he was very much involved in the Weather Underground bombings, never served time in prison. He never did.
Right, she did.
She did, but even she did, not because of her crimes directly, but only because she refused to testify in the case of another person. This was the Brinks robbery, and Bernadine Dorn refused to testify. So I think she got contempt of court and served a brief time. But these people have gotten away with it, and they know it. Bill Ayers will even say, I was guilty as a sin, but I was free as a bird.
Wow.
And that's progressive justice. By contrast, on our side, they're happy to deploy the deep state against us, against General Flynn, in a smaller way against me, and use all the weapons at their disposal to try to take us out. They'd put us in prison for life if they could. So we don't play the dirty politics that they do. We don't use the deep state against them the way they use it against us. And I have to say that's part of our weakness. That's why they do it, because they can keep getting away with it.
Yeah, it does. It sure does. It sure does seem like that. And we got a lot more to talk about right now with Dinesh D'Souza. You're watching Liquid Lunch as we breeze through this hour. Dow down still just over 100. Bitcoin down a bunch today. We're keeping our eye on that. It almost broke through the 10,300 resistance level, but didn't quite get there. You don't go anywhere. Crack open a cold drink, because we're coming back right after this to kick off hour 2. Dinesh D'Souza is going to stick with us. Me and Frankie will be back right after this.